Life was hard for Jeff and I after the fire. In a single night, it took everything from us. Our homes, our belongings, our father. When the house went ablaze, he was the first to act, escorting all of us out of there before the flames completely consumed the building. But Jeff didn't come out with us. A piece of debris had landed on him, crushing his left leg and trapping him inside. If it wasn't for our father running in to save him, we would have lost Jeff that night. He had just enough time to lift the wooden plank that crushed Jeff before the entire house came down on him. Jeff survived, barely, but he was never the same after. His entire body was covered in third-degree burns, especially his face. Months of reconstructive surgery barely did enough to get him looking like his old self again. His entire face was covered in scar tissue, with the nerves around his mouth being so severely damaged he could barely even open it. His left eye had gone completely blind, having this milky white appearance to it. What was left of his hair hung to his scalp in long black patches. It took a while for us to figure out what our next step was. Our mother, Margaret, barely made enough to make ends meet, and Jeff was just starting college while I was just finishing up high school. We couldn't afford a home like the one we had before, at least not on our own. We ended up moving to Carpenter's Landing as a solution to that problem. Our Aunt Marcy owned a plot of land here and offered to give it to us in light of everything that happened. She thought it was the least she could do after losing her brother, you know? We weren't picky about the offer either. After all, beggars can't be choosers. Despite everything we heard about this place, we thought it would be a fresh start for us. A chance to get away from the lives we had before. A chance to move on. On our first day in Carpenter's Landing, we got a good look at the new place we'd be living in. A small, rundown bungalow that hadn't been lived in for years. By the time we stepped foot in there, the paint was peeling off the walls, and it looked like some druggies used it as a crack den. Burnt cigarette butts and broken glass littered the floor, and some of the windows had to be boarded up. Only reason we were there to see it in that state was because our mom wanted to help Aunt Marcy clean the place up before we moved in. Since they didn't want us getting in the way, and Mom wasn't comfortable having her 2 teenage sons spending the whole day cleaning up used drugs and broken glass, she gave us some spending money and let us explore the whole town. I remember being super excited about the whole thing. After everything we'd gone through, it felt wonderful just to get out and explore somewhere new. Jeff, on the other hand, was very apprehensive about the whole thing. Ever since his accident, he was scared to go out in public, especially somewhere that no one knew him. He became much more reserved, often wearing this large white sweater with the hood up at all times to hide his face. I assured him that things would be okay, and he tagged along with me despite his worries. We spent that whole day riding around on our shitty little bikes, taking in all the scenery we could. Every great building, every dingy alley, every rundown gas station. We didn't care where we were going, anywhere was good enough. At the end of the day, we stopped our sightseeing tour at this small convenience store downtown. I wanted to get some snacks for later that night, and Jeff tagged along, waiting for me at the back of the store where nobody could see him. That was where we had our first run-in with this guy named Randy and his 2 buddies, Troy and Keith. Randy was the textbook definition of a generic bully. Guy dressed in this black leather jacket with ripped jeans and what looked like some kind of death metal shirt underneath. His long brown hair was slicked back with gel and his ears were covered in all kinds of piercings. The 2 guys with him, Troy and Keith, had a similar vibe to them. Troy was a bigger guy who wore a large red sweater and had this short stubble all over his face. Keith was a shorter, scrawnier kid. He wore large, baggy clothes and had a rough buzz cut that nearly went down to the scalp. When we met these guys, they were causing a ruckus in the store. Apparently the cashier caught one of them trying to sneak out of the pack with cigarettes, and Randy didn't take too well to being told off. After they were done arguing, Randy eventually found it in himself to pay the $10 that he owed, and he and his guys stormed out of the store. When I went up to pay, I was told that apparently that kind of thing was the usual for Randy and his gang. They were a bunch of troublemakers that were well known in town, bullying whoever they could and causing problems wherever they went. Apparently Randy always got away with it because his dad was an officer at the time. I paid the cashier a little bit extra for the trouble, and as I was ready to walk out with Jeff, I noticed out the store's window that the three of them had decided to hang around outside to smoke. I asked Jeff to put his hood up and avoid being seen by them, and he agreed. If these guys were as bad as I was told, there was no way in hell I was about to let them see my brother and validate all his fears of leaving the house. Fate would have a different plan for us, though, because as soon as we left the store, Randy in particular took notice of us. He called out to us, bringing attention to his two lackeys that followed him around.
"Hey, don't think I've ever seen you two around here before,"
he said, flicking his cigarette butt to the ground and stamping it out before approaching us. I remembered I tried to be the one to hold a conversation with Randy, all the while Jeff nervously stood by our bikes facing away from him. I tried to be polite, introducing myself and Jeff to Randy, but he was the kind of guy who didn't care about that shit. To him, we were just fresh meat to be picked on, and he particularly took an interest with Jeff.
"Why the hell wouldn't your brother look at me when I'm talking to him? Doesn't he got any manners?"
Randy asked, walking toward us with his hands in his pockets, all while Troy and Keith laughed at us behind them. During the whole conversation, I would shoot these occasional glances over at Jeff to see how he was doing. He was shaking, staring at the ground with this wide-eyed, empty stare like a deer in headlights. In his left hand was this lighter he carried around from back when he was smoking, one of his only possessions that survived the house fire. He would occasionally pull it out when he was stressed or nervous, fidgeting with the cap of it. That's what he was doing when Randy grabbed a hold of his shoulder and turned him around, making him face him by force. The three bullies all took turns giving their own shocked, disgusted reactions to Jeff's appearance. Randy in particular had the strongest reaction of them all, stepping back in momentary horror, which quickly devolved into mocking laughter.
"Man, no wonder you couldn't look at me. What the fuck happened to you, man?"
Randy sounded amused as he asked the question, with Keith and Troy rudely laughing behind him as if to follow suit. Before anyone could continue, I spoke for Jeff, desperate to defend my brother from the situation that was now unfolding. There was a fire. Our old place had burnt down. We were lucky that Jeff made it out alive, I yelled in defiance, tears welling up in my eyes.
"Lucky?"
Randy rebutted.
"That's what lucky looks like to you?"
He pointed at Jeff, who was now appeared to be boiling with rage. He clenched his open hand into a tight fist, and I saw his eyes go bloodshot.
"If I were you, I would have much preferred that fire take me out instead of making me look like some kind of—"
Before Randy could even finish this insult, Jeff swung at him, hitting him cleanly across his face with a hefty punch. Randy reeled back, and I immediately ran for Jeff, grabbing at his shoulders and trying to pull him back. The whole thing turned into chaos after that, with the three guys jumping on Jeff and I, leading to this massive brawl right outside the convenience store parking lot. The whole thing got broken up when I saw the cashier calling the cops from inside the store. I yelled that to the rest of the guys, and before I knew it, Randy and his lackeys were out of there in an instant. Fortunately, Jeff and I weren't badly hurt by the whole thing, with only a few minor cuts and bruises being left where we were hit. When we got back to the new house that night, our mom was, of course, concerned about the whole thing, but we just made up some lie about getting into an accident with our bikes instead of telling her what really happened. Our mom tended to worry a lot after the fire, and we didn't want her to stress too much about our new life here on our first day. A month passed, and while our new house was properly renovated to allow us to live there decently, comfortably, things did not get much easier for Jeff. He told me that Randy and his gang were relentless, especially after he started his college semester with them. They were harassing Jeff at practically every opportunity they got, with it getting so bad that one night Jeff went as far as to show me several knife wounds he had supposedly gotten from them attacking him off campus. He wouldn't let me tell anyone about the bullying. He told me that it would only make Mom want to get the police involved, and with the connections Randy had, it would only make things worse. So I kept quiet about the whole thing, no matter how much it pained me to see my brother suffering like he did. With all that in mind, I really should have seen the warning signs, when Randy went missing only a month into our semester. I remember it as clear as day. His face was plastered on every telephone pole in town. News broadcasts were talking about it everywhere, and it was the talk of my school for weeks. If I knew then what I know now, I like to think that I would have suspected Jeff right away. But back then, I just couldn't fathom the possibility of it. After we lost our dad, Jeff was the only person left in my life that I felt I was really close to. We still had our mom, yeah, but her and I were never particularly close by comparison. That and I just didn't have any reason to believe Jeff did it, you know? Sure, Randy and his guys bullied him, but Randy was also involved in some bad crowds of people. You could come up with any number of stories about what happened to him, and people would probably have bought it at the time. So, yeah, despite my mild suspicions of something being wrong, I buried those feelings and convinced myself it had to be someone else's doing. The same could not be said, however, for Troy and Keith, who only seemed to get worse after Randy's death. I remember those two continued to go after Jeff long after, with the bullying going from cruel mockery to that of vengeful harassment. Jeff told me that they practically chased him down the halls of his school, calling him a murderer and yelling things like, "We know what you did, Woods," any opportunity they got. The harassment got so bad that Jeff started to completely isolate himself, missing countless days of classes and terrifying her mother. She tried to talk to him about it, but he was completely unresponsive, leading to her asking me to try and get through to him. I went to his room one night when our mom had already gone to sleep and pushed his door open just a crack to see if he was still awake. Before I even saw him, I noticed the state that his room was in. It looked terrible. Cardboard boxes from our move were still scattered about, their contents all over the floor in large, messy piles. Clothing, school supplies, old posters, figurines, everything cluttered the room like it had been thrown around violently. And then I noticed the smell. The entire room smelled foul, like burnt cigarettes and something else I couldn't identify. The smell and sight of the room were so vile that I nearly missed Jeff himself, who I finally noticed at the foot of his bed, facing away from the door. In the dark, I didn't know what it was he was doing at first until I saw the brief flickering of his lighter burning the end of a cigarette. He would light it, staring at it for a short time like he was in some kind of trance, and then instead of smoking it like I expected, he would roll up the sleeve of his white sweater and put it out on his own arm. I was so shocked by what I was watching that I just stood in there in silence, mouth agape. And that was when I heard him mumble something under his breath, something that made my heart sink to my stomach. He said in his raspy, strained voice, "Why was Dad the only one who had to die?" The words didn't sound right coming out of his mouth. They were empty. No, they were angry. He sounded livid as he continued to light those cigarettes, bringing them to his arm and leaving a new disgusting burn scar when they were put out. I couldn't bear to watch or listen anymore, so I flung the door open. "Jeff, how could you say that?" I exclaimed. I didn't even realize until I had entered the room that tears were streaming down my face. I must have looked like a mess. Jeff quickly turned to look at me, this look of horror plastered across his face once he realized that I heard him. "Lou, it's not what I..." He tried quickly to explain himself to me, but I wouldn't let him. "Do you know how much you mean to me? To Mom? How could you go and say things like that about yourself, Jeff? I need you here, more than I've ever needed anyone. Living here, I've never felt so alone, so isolated from everyone else. It was never the same without Dad. You were the only one keeping me sane right now." I could barely keep myself together as the words flooded out of my mouth. I could see the terror on Jeff's face slowly fade to a calmer expression as I explained myself to him. And for a little bit, there was a tense silence between us as he carefully chose what to say next. I remember what he said to me, as clear as day. "I'm sorry, Lou. It's just been hard. You and Mom.
I know you both lost Dad, too. But you haven't had to deal with things like I have. You haven't had to deal with being bullied every single day. You haven't been accused of murder. And you don't have to wake up every morning and see someone completely different staring back at you in the mirror. I'm sorry.
He avoided eye contact with me as he spoke, keeping his eyes trained on his lighter. He was fidgeting with it again. I could tell that what he was saying had something he'd been bottling up for quite some time, and having to say it to me at all must have been stressful. I figured a light change of scenery would help. He was cooped up in this room for multiple days on end, and I figured some fresh air would help him. Do you remember when we used to sneak out at night back in middle school? I asked him, changing the tone of our conversation drastically. He looked up at me, shocked, tilting his head as he responded.
Yeah?
He responded, humoring me. Well, Mom is asleep right now, and you and I are still up, if you're thinking what I'm thinking. I continued, making my way to the door and gesturing to it with my hands. Jeff stared at me like I was a moron, eventually rolling his eyes and getting out of bed. He knew I wasn't about to take no for an answer, and I feel like he was also just playing along so that I wouldn't continue worrying about him throughout the night. Regardless of why he agreed, Jeff and I snuck out that night and went around town on our bikes, making a point of sightseeing and traveling to places we never seen before. I remember the rest of that night like it was yesterday. The bright city lights all around us, illuminating the streets like they were their own little suns. The massive buildings turned dark, towering silhouettes, and that cold night breeze that blew past us as we rode through the streets as fast as we wanted. If the night had ended right then and there, I feel like things could have been perfect. That was one of the few moments where it felt like Jeff and I had properly bonded as brothers again. But of course, no good thing lasts forever. And our night very quickly took a turn for the worst as we realized we were being followed. We stopped a couple of streets from our house after making some laps around our neighborhood. I remember we stopped by a stop sign on our intersection, with there being a light drizzle that signaled for us to start making our way back. Right as we were getting ready to leave, though, a familiar pair of voices yelled out to us. I quickly turned to look at us, seeing Troy and Keith approaching. I almost didn't recognize them at first. They looked so different from when we encountered them at the gas station. They both looked like they hadn't slept in days, with Keith's outfit looking filthy and Troy's stubble having become a complete poorly kept beard.
Hey!
Troy shouted at us.
What are you doing out here so late, Woods? Looking for more victims?
When Troy spoke, there was this growl to his voice. He sounded pissed, beyond pissed. He and Keith continued to approach, with Jeff and I not knowing how to respond or what to do. That was when we saw Troy reach into his pocket and he pulled out a small switchblade that he kept hidden in there. The moment Jeff and I saw him unveil the blade, we tried to ride off on our bikes, but the two guys were close enough that they were able to catch up and pull us off. There was a struggle between us, but it quickly stopped the moment that I saw Troy hit the knife to Jeff's throat. I fell to my knees with Keith still firmly wrapping his arm around my throat, and I began to panic.
Please, don't hurt him. He didn't do anything to you,
I pleaded, terrified of what Troy was planning. My begging only seemed to make him angrier as he pulled Jeff in closer to him. Jeff struggled for a moment, kicking his feet and grabbing at Troy's arm, which held him in place, but quickly it stopped once the blade made contact with his neck.
Didn't do anything. Is that what he told you?
Troy said, staring at me with eyes that looked more like a wild animal's than a man's. He then turned his attention towards Jeff.
Why don't you tell your little brother, Jeff? Why don't you tell him what you did?
Jeff never looked at Troy, instead continuing to stare at me the entire time, even as he spoke.
I don't know what you're talking about,
Jeff responded, which only made Troy bring the knife closer. Now the faintest bit of blood could be seen running down Jeff's neck as the knife tore skin. Jeff had no reaction.
Bullshit! If you won't tell him, Jeff, then I will!
Troy shouted, now pointing the knife at me.
Your older brother never told you what he got up to at night, did he? Well, Randy sure told us. Before he died, Randy went to Keith and I and told him that this freak was stalking him. Said he caught him off the corner of his eye, following him outside of school. He was scared, man. And we had never seen Randy scared. He even told us a couple nights before he died that he saw your brother here standing outside of his house.
I didn't know what to make of what they were telling me. They sounded insane. Here they were in the middle of the night, probably stalking us, pointing a knife at my brother and accusing him of killing Randy? I couldn't believe it. No, I refused to believe it. Troy continued, though. And as he did, I could see the panic setting into Jeff's eyes.
We didn't believe him at the time. We thought that he was messing with us or something. Then a couple days later, he goes missing, and we have no idea where he could have gone. If we just listened to him, maybe he'd still be here. If we just listen, then this freak could be behind bars right now. But we didn't. And now we gotta make up for it.
As he said that, Troy pointed the knife at Jeff once more, who began kicking his feet and struggling again. He looked terrified.
Okay, it's true.
Jeff shouted at a volume I didn't think was possible.
I killed him. I killed Randy, but I wasn't stalking him. It was self-defense, Lou. He attacked me in an alley when I was just trying to go home. He pulled a knife on me and he tried to kill me. I only got away because I wrestled it out of his hands and stabbed him with it.
I had never heard Jeff speak that way before, even before the accident. His voice was shrill and shaken, his eyes large and dilated.
Self-defense, my ass!
Keith chimed in.
If it was self-defense, then why did you run? Why didn't they find Randy, huh?
Because I was scared. I knew Randy's dad was an officer. I didn't think anyone would believe me. So I hit the body and I ran away.
Jeff blurted out, keeping his eyes trained on me. Despite the fact that Troy was the one threatening his life, the entire time it felt more like Jeff was trying to convince me of his innocence than anyone else out there that night. I just sat in silence. I didn't know what to do or what to think anymore. Troy answered for me, though, the look of fury never leaving his face.
You can say whatever you want, freak. But I don't believe you,
he said. His voice sounded calmer than before, almost a whisper, but the rage never left it. I don't know what he was planning on doing to Jeff, but I never got to find out as police sirens could be heard quickly approaching. Turns out one of our neighbors saw what was going on from inside her house, and she decided to call the police before anyone could get hurt. An officer quickly arrived on scene and broke up the entire thing before Troy and Keith could do anything. Everything after that passed by in a blur. Troy and Keith were arrested right then and there, and the entire time they were escorted to the car and were kicking and screaming all kinds of insults and profanity at us. Once they were taken care of, an officer stuck by to ask some questions to Jeff and I about what happened. He asked why the two of them attacked us, and Jeff froze up completely. I could see the fear written all over his expression. He probably thought I was going to tell the officer what the other two had told me, but truth be told, I believed him. Maybe it was my naivety or the depression in his voice when he confessed to me, but I really, truly believe that if my brother had killed Randy, it was for a good reason. And so I lied to the officer, told him nothing about Jeff's confession, about the truth of Randy's disappearance. That night was the first night in months where I felt I had my brother back, and I was not about to lose him again because of some massive misunderstanding. I told the officer a half-truth, explaining that Troy and Keith were friends with Randy and that they blamed my brother for the disappearances. When he pressed further, all I said was that they used it to bully Jeff, and convinced themselves it was his fault when Randy disappeared. The officer seemed to like my answers. He nodded along as I explained things, paying close attention to the words I chose, and eventually he seemed satisfied. He left us off with a warning about going out at night, and asked if he could come back in the morning to ask some additional questions about the two bullies. Once I agreed, the officer simply tipped his hat to us, and we were let go. I thought it was a miracle. Two of us being sent home like that after I told such a massive lie. But I think Jeff saw things differently. Maybe it was the demeanor of the officer, perhaps his own paranoia. But Jeff was convinced that the officer was onto us, that the additional questions he wanted to ask in the morning had nothing to do with the bullies, but rather Jeff's involvement in Randy's disappearance. The ride home after that felt like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't dare speak to Jeff. He was unusually quiet, even for himself. And the entire time we rode on our bikes, he simply stared ahead. He never looked at me, nor do I even think he was looking at the road. He just stared ahead, into nothing. When we arrived at home, he stormed inside with no regard for our sleeping mother, who may be startled awake by him. I was worried. I'd never seen my brother like that, so I followed him as he made his way toward his room. What followed next was the single most horrifying moment of my life. He slammed open the door to his room, made his way inside, and began what I could only describe as an adult temper tantrum. He grabbed a hold of whatever he could get his hands on and began violently throwing them around his room, thrashing about in a near feral rage. I don't think he was even aware of me being there to see it. He just continued doing so until he got hold of one box in particular, which he violently threw against the wall. The contents of the box spilled out on the floor, revealing more clothing and school supplies which were haphazardly stored in it. Amongst this pile of random, innocuous items, however, I heard something that instantly drew my attention to the floor and made Jeff completely stop in his place. The sound of metal rattling against the wooden floor. I looked down and saw that buried beneath the clothing and supplies which were stored inside that box was a small switchblade, which looked to be covered in dried, crusty blood. My mind began to race at the sight of it. I had no idea why my brother would have kept Randy's knife in our house, so poorly hidden underneath all his untouched clothing and supplies. Jeff? Why would you keep Randy's knife? I asked, and I turned my gaze from the knife to him, desperate for an answer. What I saw staring back at me was someone completely different from my brother. He stood at the center of the room, completely frozen in place, with a hollow, soulless stare I'd never seen from my brother. No, from a person before. His eyes were open unnaturally wide, almost looking as if something was forcing them to stay open. He didn't blink, and the pupil of his right eye was so dilated that it almost made his entire eye look black. That stare told me more than any words ever could. It told me that in this moment of weakness that Jeff had shown me something I never wanted to see, and the thought of that brought me a greater terror than anything else. I began to question him further, desperate for an answer, desperate for anything he could say to put my panicked mind to rest. Jeff, why did you keep this knife? He continued to stare. Jeff, this was Randy's knife, right? He continued to stare. Jeff. I was so overwhelmed I could barely get the words out. Jeff, those cuts on your body. Randy didn't give them to you, did he? He continued to stare. At that point, I didn't know who it was I was talking to anymore. I turned a blind eye to my suspicions for so long. But right there, in the middle of that dark room, was someone I didn't even recognize as my brother anymore. For a brief moment, while I stood there in complete shock and terror, I could see his demeanor change to that of something inhuman. He hunched forward, looking as though he was going to advance towards me before our mother's tired voice could be heard from behind me. Boys, what's wrong? She asked. It was clear from the way she was rubbing her eyes and the way she spoke that we had just woken her from her sleep. Jeff never once looked away from me, not even reacting to the sound of her mother's voice. He just continued moving towards me like some kind of animal, taking large, exaggerated footsteps. I ran out of Jeff's room and tried to usher our mom out of the house before I could even explain what was going on. I didn't know what was wrong with Jeff, but there was no way I was going to spend the night in that house after what I saw. Our mother, however, stopped me dead in my tracks and demanded an explanation about what was wrong. I couldn't offer much. I was in such a panic state that I trampled over my words. All I managed to muster up was, "Something is wrong with Jeff," before I noticed him standing in the darkness of the hallway behind us. He held the switchblade in his hand and remained motionless, waiting for what our mom or I would do next. When our mom saw him, she didn't recognize the danger her and I were in. She tried to reason with him. "Jeff, honey, what's wrong? Why are you holding that knife?" she asked. I remember from the way she spoke, she sounded more concerned than afraid. I don't think she ever managed her own son could do anything to harm her, so in that moment, despite how it looked, she didn't see any danger to herself. Jeff never responded. He simply remained frozen in place. Our mother continued trying to get through to him. I tried stopping her, but she refused to listen to my warnings. She didn't see what I saw. She didn't know what I knew. All she knew was that something was going wrong with her son. And despite everything, she wanted nothing more than to help him. And so she marched forward into what would become her own demise. That moment, she took a step forward, reaching for Jeff. He suddenly sprang into action at a speed I never thought possible for someone like him. He quickly wrestled her to the ground, overpowering her completely. Once she was down, Jeff kneeled down on top of her, holding the switchblade over his head with both hands. She pleaded with him in her last moments, yelling things like, "Why are you doing this?" and "What could I have done, Jeff?" But her questions fell on deaf ears. Before she was even able to finish her thought, Jeff plunged the switchblade deep into the side of her throat. Thick, dark blood ran down the blade, pulling on the floor beneath her and slowly creeping towards me. I stood there in stunned horror. What I saw in front of me didn't feel real. Earlier that night was the happiest I'd been in months. It felt like I'd finally had my brother back, and the two of us could be the carefree kids we were back before our lives fell apart. And now, on that same night, I saw the man I considered my brother knelt down, knife in hand, waiting for his mother to drown in her own blood. The worst part of it all, too, was that he didn't even have the decency to look at her while he did it. The entire time, our mother laid there, pleading to see even a semblance of the person Jeff was to her. He was looking at me. He stared at me with that same empty, soulless look I saw only moments prior, as if to tell me that somehow, by some twisted logic, what I was watching unfold before me was my fault. When the life finally left our mother's eyes, and the gurgling and coughing came to a stop, Jeff clumsily attempted to pull the knife from her throat. He was met with a surprising amount of resistance. He'd lodged it so far in there that it took multiple strong tugs to pull it out. So much that when he finally did, it caused him to stumble backwards a moment. Then he began advancing towards me once more. He moved in that same alien way I saw in his bedroom. He slowly inched his way towards me, taking long, exaggerated steps, only stopping briefly when I would show any sudden movements. I was so shocked by what I'd seen that my legs turned to jellies and they crumbled to the floor. As I pathetically attempted to crawl away from Jeff, I desperately tried to say something, anything, that would make him explain to me why he was doing this. The only thing I could muster out was the word "why," which I choked out between my tears. It was enough to make him stop, as if the very question offended him. He then said something that changed everything for me.
Why?
He replied sarcastically, his eyes twitching.
Because you ruined everything, Lou.
He knelt down next to me as he spoke, blocking the exit to the house with his body.
You just had to survive that night, didn't you? You just had to smell the fire. You just had to wake Mom and Dad. All those months of planning ruined. It would have been perfect, Lou. We all could have died together, but no. You and Mom survived, and I was stuck like this. It was right then and there that I understood the true depths of what my brother was. As I sat mere feet away from my own mother's corpse, Jeff crouched over top of me. It finally dawned on me why this was all happening. I'd spent so long trying to pin a reason to it, to find what the inciting incident was, the moment that bent my brother's life out of shape. But there never was one. It wasn't the bullies. It wasn't our dad. It wasn't the fire. It was Jeff. It was always Jeff. I was living with a monster, wearing human skin for my whole life. And only when it was too late did I finally realize it. He continued his depraved rant, as if he'd rehearsed it for months on end. Do you know what it's like to spend every single day trapped in a shell of your own body, being babied by the people you couldn't kill? Do you understand how humiliating that is? It's like there really is a God up there, mocking me for my failure. Well, I didn't plan on failing this time. I spent months thinking about that night, what I could have done differently, how much it hurt. Reliving that pain, even in the smallest of ways, helped me figure it out, though. It was going to be perfect, Lou. But you ruined it again. You just had to keep babying me. You just had to be such a shitty liar. You made me do this. You made me act early and sloppily. That's okay, though. This is still going to be the happiest night of my life. Oh, if I could smile right now, Lou, I'd be grinning ear to ear. After he finished his rant, he stood again and wrapped his arms around himself in pure ecstasy, rocking back and forth. Over and over again, he said to himself, if only I could smile, if only I could smile, before he suddenly stopped. A look of realization plastered all over his face. He glanced down at the knife in his hand, our mother's fresh blood still trickling off of it. Then he glanced back at me before saying, I can smile. That was then that he took the knife to his own face, and I was forced to watch him crudely carve a disgusting smile of blood across it. He was clumsy with the knife, tugging across each of his cheeks like a child carving a pumpkin. There were moments where he'd stop gagging and coughing on his own blood, and he continued regardless until a vile, painful smile stretched across his face, ear to ear. The sight of such a horrific act of self-mutilation was enough for me to break free from the shocked trance that I was in. I sprinted in the opposite direction of Jeff, toward the hall where our bedrooms were. Jeff gave me a head start, distracted by the euphoria of his new face, and I took that opportunity to run into this room. Jeff's room was the only one you would see when entering the hallway, and I believed that if I hid in there, I could find something, anything to defend myself with. I flung the door open, nearly trampled over all the miscellaneous items strewn about on the floor, and made my way into his closet to hide. At that point, I could hear him beginning to walk around the house again, calling out my name in a voice that barely sounded human. I began to frantically look around the dark closet, pushing aside whatever clothing and boxes were in my way. That was when I noticed the smell again. That same stench I smelled earlier that night when I walked into Jeff's room. I thought it was just the smell of the cigarettes before, but inside that closet it was much stronger. I pushed aside more unclean laundry, hoping to discover the origin of the smell, when I found it buried deep within a corner of the closet. Multiple small cans of gasoline, which were neatly hidden away. Around them were small boxes of matches, as well as some burnt-out cigarette butts. The sight and smell of them were enough to make me gag, a sound that I feared revealed my hiding place to Jeff.
I needed to be quick, to find something, anything that I could use to fight back once he found me. I kept searching until I got my hands on his old backpack, opening it and looking through whatever supplies he kept in there. I found old notebooks, unopened packs of cigarettes, and what ended up catching my attention, what looked to be a box cutter. I took it out, opening it and turning to the closet door to wait for Jeff's arrival. What I was greeted, however, was something from my worst nightmares. Jeff was already there, standing at the entrance of the closet, the door open just enough that I could see one of his bloodshot eyes peering at me from the darkness. When I saw him, I let out a shrill scream, and he began laughing to himself as he flung the door open and attempted to pin me to the ground right then and there. I struggled against him, swinging the box cutter wildly before he overpowered me, holding down my arm with his right hand and dancing the switchblade against my face with his left. I remembered how I was screaming and crying in that moment, all the while the man trying to kill me attempted to soothe me like a mother with their child. He got right up close to me, the blood from his fresh wounds dripping onto my face, causing me to gag, and said something to me that I still hear in the back of my mind.
Shh! It'll be alright, Lou. When you next wake up, you're gonna see Mom and Dad again. Just go to sleep.
He then raised the switchblade over his head like he did before when he killed our mother. But right before he could swing down and finish me, I kicked him off of me with all the strength I could muster and stabbed him in the side of the throat with a box cutter. As soon as I'd done that, I made a mad dash for the door to our home, running out into the night and screaming for someone, anyone to help me. I never bothered to check if Jeff was alive or still following me. I just ran and ran until my legs gave way and one of our neighbors found me. The police were called soon after. They went to our old home to investigate and found no signs of Jeff anywhere. I was told that they would find him, that he would be brought to justice. But 2 years have passed, and Jeff was never caught. I've spent those 2 years living in constant fear that he will return and find me. I've begun sleeping during the day. I don't talk to anybody. I sleep with a knife beneath my pillow. It seemed like all you officers moved on from finding my brother, but I never could. And now you come to my doorstep, telling me that he could be back, and he's killing people that look just like me. And now we're all suffering because he wasn't caught. When Lou finished his story, the entire room fell dreadfully silent. The two officers clearly didn't know what to say, simply taking in all the details and trying to process them. Samuel was the first to speak, making what Lou saw as a weak attempt at reassurance.
Lou, I'm sorry we never found your brother. I promise you, though, no matter what, that we will find him. You won't have to live like this anymore. You won't have to be afraid of him coming back. Soon, all of that will be over. The two officers stood after that, asking Lou if he had anything else to tell them. He simply shook his head, and not long after, they made their way out. Lou wanted to believe what Samuel had to say. It was clear the man cared. But after 2 years of Jeff having never been found, he didn't want to get his hopes up. Once the two men were gone from his house, the tiredness hit Lou all at once. He was awoken after only 2 hours of sleep, and he had no intentions of waiting until nightfall to get his rest. He made his way back into his room, peeking around the dark corners of his apartment one last time before opening the door to his bedroom and stepping back inside. He lay down on his old yellowed mattress, tossing and turning as he tried his hardest to force himself back to sleep. But try as he might, he just couldn't do it. Something just didn't feel right. After 20 minutes of failed attempts to force himself to sleep, Lou finally sat up in his bed and surveyed his room. He knew something was wrong, but he just couldn't pinpoint it. He scanned his surroundings, obviously looking for anything that could be out of place, and that was when he noticed it. The detail that he was subconsciously aware of, but didn't take direct note of until that very moment. A mild draft that was slightly pushed against his curtains. Lou always kept his windows closed. He tried to shuffle out of bed, immediately digging around under his pillow to grab his switchblade, only to realize he left it in the kitchen when the officers had visited. He ran over to the window, slamming it closed when he heard something behind him.
The slow, high-pitched sound of a door creaking. Lou turned to see the origin of the sound, and was met with his worst fear come true. There, peering through the small crack left by the opening of his closet door, was an eye. A bloodshot eye that stared at him from the darkness. A voice muttered in a hushed, perverted whisper.
You found me.